Hello everyone. Let us officially start our series on knowledge. First, this series will be divided in 8 chapters. The first chapter, Metaphysics, in which we will talk about the true essence of reality. The second chapter, Physics, in which we will take a closer look on matter. The third chapter, Human Metaphysics, in which we will examine the essence of a human. The fourth chapter, Human Physics, in which we will observe how the human essence acts with matter in the body. The fifth chapter, Ethics, in which we will discuss what morality is based on. The sixth chapter, Practical Ethics, in which we will take a look at how ethics can be applied to human behavior. The seventh chapter, Politics, in which we will describe how ethics applies to the collective creating the perfect society. And finally the eighth chapter, Practical Politics, in which we will reveal how to actually reach the perfect society. Without further ado, let's get right into the first episode of Metaphysics. It is often said that there is no such thing as objective reality, which means nothing can be known for certain. This is, of course, bullshit.
But Thomas, nothing exists, because if something exists then it must be either located in itself or in something else, but it can't be in something else because it would be more than one. And if it was located in itself then it would also be more than one. So nothing can exist, logically.
Listen, gorgeous. Let's just ignore the fact that there is a very obvious fallacy in your argument. If you're denying existence, then you're also denying your denial, which would mean that you're both denying and not denying existence at the same time. This is called contradiction, and logic doesn't like them. Now, at this point we know something exists. We don't know what exists, but we know there is a substance. Whatever this substance is, in order for it to be, it must have the property of existence. In other words, in order for something to be, it must first be able to be. So, something that is thanks to a property called existence, which itself is not an entity, but a property.
But Thomas, how can something exist if it isn't a thing?
Well, it actually is a thing. It just isn't an entity. It's a verb, an attribute. In the statement A equals B, A and B are entities, but the sign equals is the verb. Likewise, the verb is means something subsists and therefore it's not an entity, but it's subsistence itself. This means existence is self-subsistent. That is, existence exists because of itself, and therefore the phrase, "Yeah, but what created that?" has no meaning here. And also solves the millennial question, why is there something rather than nothing? Because there can't be nothing, since it would imply the non-existence of existence, which is illogical. Existence is, and it can't not be. The existence of existence is so obvious that even Descartes, who was the single most skeptic philosopher of the post-Aristotelian world, had to admit the existence of existence, summing up in his famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am." Kurt Gödel also famously proved the necessity of some transcendental property in every possible world. And what do all worlds that exist have in common for certain? Exactly, the property of existence. To sum up everything, the fundamental pillar of reality is the property of existence. And the fact that something exists which is not an entity proves the existence of something beyond the physical world, which is exactly what metaphysics means. And is the reason this whole concept exists. That there is something more than matter, and that the world isn't merely an agglomeration of particles in different shapes. So, I think we've answered more than enough questions today. Next time we will discuss what is existence made of and how we can divide its purposes. See you all next time. Hello again. Last time we discussed what the fundamental property of reality is, and we concluded that its existence, meant as a property. Today we will discuss how this property behaves and what roles does it have within reality itself. Now, what do I mean by role? A role is an identity. For example, a house serves the purpose of welcoming a family, as well as providing a job for the builders. That is two purposes that a house fulfills, which means it has two roles, family welcomer and job provider. Everything has a purpose, and something doesn't have to be an entity in order to have a role. Because properties also serve a purpose. So, what are the roles of existence? Well, since without existence nothing would be, then existence must be the cause of everything. It must be the cause of time as well, so existence is also eternal, because it's not existence that relies on time, but it's time that relies on existence. Same goes for space, making existence omnipresent. Existence also is the basis for every action, and therefore everything possible subsists thanks to existence, which thus can be called omnipotent. The same applies to knowledge. All knowledge exists because of existence, so existence is also omniscient.
But Thomas, an entity has properties. How can a property have anything like that?
You see, if knowledge, time, space, or anything didn't come from existence, they would have come from something else. But there is nothing else, and they can't have come from nothing, so the only explanation is they came from existence itself.
But that doesn't make any sense. I don't understand it.
I know you don't understand how, but there is no other logical alternative, so just because you don't understand something, it doesn't mean it's not true.
But the paradox of omnipotence. Nothing can be omnipotent.
The paradox of omnipotence makes no sense. If you know what omnipotence is the ability to do anything logically possible. And since nothing illogical is possible, the paradox of omnipotence is merely a contradiction that leaves you nowhere.
But
it's like saying, this statement is false. It's a paradox, but this doesn't mean the statement doesn't exist.
But
now we will treat a very complicated matter. So pay as much attention as you can. Remember this thing from the first episode? I made this as to make it obvious that without existence, represented as the color green, there would be no substance, the area inside the shape. However, if I drew it this way, that would still have been the same concept, but it would have been a different substance. This means that the way existence behaves determines what an entity is. We call the shape form. So a square and a circle are both shapes, and are both delimited by a line, but the shape of the line makes them different. Likewise, a duck and a pizza are both entities, and both subsist thanks to existence, but the form makes them different. This explains how there can be different entities, while there being only one essence. A good analogy is the guitar analogy. Just as one string of a guitar produces many different sounds based on how tense it is, likewise existence can produce different entities based on how it's arranged. Lastly, existence is also the end of everything, its goal. What I mean by that is existence also shapes the direction and the purpose of all entities. Why? Simply because existence is the cause of that direction, and the final point also must be existence. Because again, if it wasn't existence, it would be something else, but there is nothing else. And therefore this scenario must be false.
But Thomas, everything is just matter arranged in different shapes. The universe is meaningless, it has no purpose.
Here's where you're wrong. It's easier to understand this if you picture entities as vectors, A vector needs three things to exist: a starting point, a modulus, and a direction. If one of those is missing, the vector itself stops existing, and that includes the direction as well. This can only mean that everything that exists also has a purpose, otherwise it wouldn't have a cause, and thus wouldn't exist. Rocks exist, therefore they have a cause, therefore they also have a purpose. So far, we've pointed out three roles for existence: cause, form, and end. About those three, we must say that they're not the same thing, despite them all being existence.
But Thomas, how can existence be both cause, form, and end while those three aren't each other?
The same way a house is both a shelter and a job provider, despite the fact that shelter and job provider are different things.
That's modulism. Those three parts of existence are just different ways it manifests. They're not actually existence itself.
Not so, because those three are the fundamental units of existence. Without one of them, existence wouldn't make sense, and thus those three are not contingent things, but the only non-contingent thing that exists is existence itself. Because we saw in the first episode that existence cannot be denied, and those three also cannot be denied, while everything else can. Therefore existence is those three things, and they aren't just different aspects of it. Existence also has one essence, because otherwise there would be different kinds of existence, which is impossible. Therefore cause, form, and end are all existence, while still not being each other. Let's clarify something. Everything is caused by the cause, so the form and the end both come from the cause, and also, the end comes from the cause, and from the form. Because different shapes are made for different purposes, and therefore a different shape determines a different end. So there you have it. This is the most accurate representation of the property of existence. That's all for today. Next time we'll dive further in those three roles of existence, breaking them down until we find out how sensible objects are made. See you next time. Be well. Hello everyone. Today we will concentrate on the figure of the cause. We'll see what it means to be cause of something and its implications. Keep in mind this is an open dialogue, Plato style, so if you have questions feel free to ask them. Now, let's get into today's episode. We've determined that existence is cause. Now we have to describe what does it mean to be a cause, and to do that we must define the principle of causality, which is ultimately based on movement. Since without movement there is no change, and without change there's no causality, since nothing can be created or destroyed. To be cause of B is to be the reason of the change of an entity from a state A to a state B, from an instant 1 to an instant 2. So if I'm the cause of something in an instant, that something wouldn't exist if I were removed from the situation prior to that instant. Here's where we introduce the Aristotelian terms of act and potency. An entity in act is, an entity in potency can be. For example, an egg is an egg in act and a chicken in potency. Or, for the most scientific ones, a kid is a kid in act and an adult in potency. The relation of causality is the relation of act and potency, and the cause of something is what makes that something go from potency to act. This chain of cause and effect cannot be infinite, because that would imply a logical fallacy, since an infinite chain has no solid foothold and will fall down even if it's infinite. Look at these dots and imagine them as entities. They must have been created by something, so maybe they've created each other. But if that were the case, none of these entities would be the first cause, since every one of them would be caused by another, and as a result there would have been no first step to start the chain to begin with. So a cyclical chain is not possible. Therefore the big bounce theory is utter bullshit. An infinite regress is also impossible because of the same reason. Maybe they were all created by another entity which disappeared, but then what created that entity? And also, how would that entity be able to just disappear in nothingness? Then maybe they were once part of a same entity, and that would be the efficient cause. But if that were the case, then they must have already existed as parts of a whole, and the problem would persist. Ultimately, it is necessary to state that all of these entities were created by a non-entity, that is, an immaterial being. Because if the cause was a material one, it would have a cause as well, and that would create an infinite regress, which is impossible. Now, since the universe is composed of entities, it must have come from something immaterial, which is the efficient cause of the universe. The efficient cause is thus necessary, and therefore there must be some kind of immateriality for the universe to exist. The cause therefore is immaterial and necessary, the exact attributes we've given existence. That means existence is fully cause of everything. I say fully, because no parts of existence can be excluded, since that would imply different kinds of existence.
But Thomas, how do you know the universe wasn't created by random quantum fluctuations? The Big Bang may have been generated by some kind of anomaly within the quantum realm, because given an infinite amount of time, everything that has more than zero probability of happening will happen.
That's nonsense, because nothing is still nothing, and quantum fluctuations aren't nothing, they are something, and they must have a cause even if random. Furthermore, such scenario presupposes the existence of time and space, thus you're forgetting the fact that they are entities as well, and therefore they must have a cause.
But then how do you know there was only one cause and not multiple?
There can't be multiple causes for reality, because if that were the case then the entities wouldn't be able to interact with each other, since they're made of different substances. So either all of the causes are the same substance or the entities are two different universes which cannot interact with each other. But implying the existence of more than one universe violates Occam's razor, and therefore only the universe we live in must be accepted as true. That's it for the first role of existence. Next time we'll concentrate on figuring out the second role, form. See you then. Hello everyone, let's move on toward the second role of existence. This time we'll discuss what form is, how do we solve the problem of identity, and how sensible objects are made. Let's get right into it. I've explained what form is in the second episode. In short, the identity of an object isn't given only by the matter which constitutes them, otherwise coal and diamond would be the same thing. The difference between coal and diamond stands in how their matter is arranged. As you can see, the sole movement of parts in the object can make that object become something else. To better understand what a form is, Here's an example. This is a cat. This is a different kind of cat. This is also a cat. And this is an apple. Why do we recognize the first three as cats but not the last one? Well, according to the English dictionary, a cat is defined as a small domesticated carnivorous mammal with soft fur, a short snout, and retractable claws. But this is a cat and it is not small. Therefore it shouldn't be considered a cat. Same for a cat without fur. We must think of the form of a cat as whatever distinguishes a cat from an apple. But the fact that a big cat or a cat without fur still count as cats is proof that size or the presence of fur are not part of a cat's form. Well, what about being carnivorous? Yeah, there are no cats which can't eat meat, therefore being carnivorous is a distinguishing trait of cats. But cats aren't the only carnivorous animal, there are plenty other felines. So maybe the answer is DNA. But then a cat hair would also count as an individual cat. And also, how would DNA work for non-living things? We must find something that distinguishes cats from other entities, but that something appears not to be material. Hey, would you look at that? More evidence against materialism. I sure hope no materialist is crying and seething at this video.
This is complete bullshit. You're saying a cat cannot be defined. You're stupid.
Are you able to define a cat?
Yes, a cat is first of all a living thing.
So a dead cat isn't a cat?
Well, yes. But a cat can see, inanimate objects cannot.
But then a blind cat wouldn't be a cat.
But a cat has paws, and claws, and it has a tail, and—
You're just listing typical attributes cats have. We can remove any of those attributes and still be left with a cat. You keep trying to find ad hoc explanations for your beliefs but you constantly fail. And the fact that your beliefs are not based on solid evidence, but you have to construct that evidence while discussing with others proves that you never actually knew why you believed something. You're a disgrace to the scientific method, because you construct an idea, find evidence that aligns with that idea, and just ignore contradicting evidence with some bullshit excuse. Grow up, accept reality, and stop acting like a 4-year-old throwing a tantrum. Where was I? Oh yeah. It seems logical to think that forms act as the blueprint of entities. They give off the arrangement necessary to construct a certain thing, and they do not stem from materiality. Furthermore, it looks like the human mind has the ability to know forms without being able to explain them, as we first saw. Therefore there is some kind of connection between human mind and forms. Keep this concept in mind. As you may see, forms can vary, and some forms can be more similar to others based on how much they have in common. This means that there is a gradient of objects, and we can represent them as sets. Aristotle called this sets categories. He points out that there can be different categories and, most importantly, that there is an end to the hierarchy of categories. The smallest category you can have is one that contains a primary substance. This cat is a primary substance, while cat is a secondary substance. Aristotle says that substances can vary based on different properties, including time. This means that you are not the same one you were some seconds ago. And do you know what that means? Exactly, none of those ships is the ship of Theseus. This one is the one Theseus used for all of this time, while this one is the one made of the original materials. The ship of Theseus stopped existing the instant after it was completed, because nothing is immune to change. As you can see, forms can be quite tricky to understand, but once you do, they start making a lot more sense. Speaking of understanding, remember how intellect has a special relationship with forms? It seems that intellect is not affected by change. I'm not talking about intelligence, I'm talking about your mind, your consciousness. Even if you go unconscious for a few moments, You do not wake up believing to be a completely different person. You come back completely unchanged. What if you wake up without memory? Of course, you would think you're a different person, but you would still have consciousness and understand that you're a thing. This is very odd, but we may go deeper in it when we will talk about human essence. For now, let's just note that there is a very strong link between form and intellect. Lastly, since formality must have a cause, or it wouldn't exist, formality is eternally generated by the cause. Why eternally? Because even if forms can change, formality cannot be absent, and therefore it is not affected by time. This is all for today, maybe even too much. I don't want to fill your mind with too many concepts at once. Next time we'll see the last role of existence, end. Until then, see you all. Hello everyone. Today the trilogy will be concluded. We're going to talk about the third role of existence, end. I beg you to listen carefully, as this matter is very complicated and requires a lot of reasoning. Now, let us begin. As we've determined in the video about causality, the existence of cause and effect is based on movement. However, for there to be a movement in the first place, there must be a point towards which the movement is directed, just as there is a point from which the movement begins. Such point is called end, and its function is exactly the opposite as the function of the cause. If causality is that from which everything comes, finality is that towards which everything is directed. This explains the eternal generation of the end from the form. Because if form comes from the cause, then form is directed towards the end. It can't be otherwise by definition. The classic example here is the analogy of the carpenter. Imagine there is a carpenter. His job is to make a table, so that people may be able to eat and drink on it. In this analogy, the carpenter represents the cause of the table, the design of the table represents its form, and dining represents its end. You can tell that in order for something to have an end, it must have a form that suits that end. I will now ask you a very simple yet really complicated question. What is good? I mean, how do we identify something good or bad? We can try to find an answer if we look at daily speech. For example, this restaurant is good. This statement obviously means that the food in that restaurant tastes good. Now, isn't the end of a restaurant to provide good food for its customers? Of course. Then we say that a restaurant that makes good food is a good restaurant. Furthermore, a good engineer is an engineer that succeeds in doing his work flawlessly, just as he is expected to. It seems therefore that an object is good if that object accomplishes its natural goal.
But Thomas, then you believe Auschwitz was good because it achieved its goal?
Okay, listen, I'm tired of hearing this argument against my claim. Existence is the highest thing. Existence is also finality itself, and we say that something is good whenever it accomplishes its goal. But this is, of course, relative to that object. If we want to know what is good by objective standards, we must look at the good of the highest being, that is, existence. What is the good relative to existence? Well, since the good of something is whatever the end of that something is, then the good of existence is its goal. But then, what is the goal of existence? Simple. We determined that all three roles of existence are existence themselves. This applies to finality as well. and therefore the end of existence is existence itself. In other words, existence is its own goal. By the same reasoning, we can say that existence is also goodness itself. This is why not everything that follows its own goal is good by universal standards. In a mafia organization, the good of the organization is to extort as much money as possible, but in the society in which the organization lives, the good of the society completely changes based on the frame of reference. If we want to know what is objectively good, we must look at what is the goal of the objectively true, that is existence. This is all fine, but on a practical scale, what is the actual end of everything? Well, I argue that that end is none other than love.
Ha ha ha, stupid Christian weaklings. Still revolving around loving people, Christianity made Europe weak by destroying our strong pagan values. This is all a conspiracy from the Levante. Christian feelers praising a dead Jew on a stick.
In all seriousness, if you think about it, loving something means wanting the good of that something, and the good is the end. Then the act of loving means willing the end of that something. Now, if you remember, the form generates the end eternally. So it is not absurd to say that the form wills the end, and therefore the form performs an act of love. By the same line of reasoning, the cause also performs an act of love, since finality also comes from the cause. Loving the end, therefore, is willing the good, but the end is good itself, and therefore loving the good means willing the end. In other words, the meaning of everything, especially the meaning of existence, is love itself. Well guys, this is all for finality. We've officially concluded the talk on existence. However, there are still 2 videos in the metaphysics part before we come to the next chapter. And remember, we haven't even scratched the surface. We have a long way to go, and I hope with all of my essence, that we will make it all the way through. To the very end. And as always, be well.
What's the difference between something that exists beyond time and space and something that doesn't exist at all?
I felt the need to do a video like this. I noticed there were a few misunderstandings with what time and space are, especially with the video you saw at the beginning. I ultimately decided to do this video when my friend Pseudocellos, whom I suggest you follow since he's a great philosopher, posted this comment under one of my videos, arguing that an infinite amount of time is possible if we accept Plotinus's definition of time. Today we will answer all misconceptions about time and space. Thus, let's start. Firstly, we will clarify that time and space are bound together. Both of them are dimensions where movement can occur. There is virtually no difference between the 3 spatial dimensions and the temporal one from an absolute frame of reference. The difference is only perceived by us because we are 3-dimensional beings. If you imagine a square living in 2 dimensions, the third one would be its temporal dimension. But it's his frame of reference that is moving, not reality itself. In this sense, time is actually already written, and we are living it moment by moment.
But Thomas, does that mean that our destiny is already written and that we have no free will? If I'm already predestined to do something, then I don't actually have a choice.
We will have the time to go deeper in this subject when we will talk about human essence. For now, Just know that yes, we have free will, and yes, our destiny is already written. Both of those views are compatible in a fairly simple way, however I won't go into detail right now. Now, if time could be infinite, then it must not be an entity, otherwise it couldn't be infinite, as we saw in previous episodes. However, if time is not an entity, then space isn't as well, since the two are bound together. It seems absurd to affirm that space is not an entity, because then it wouldn't be able to contain other entities. But even if time wasn't an entity, then how would it be able to be affected and distorted by matter itself? Let me clarify. Phenomena such as time dilation are generated by the amount of matter in an object, and they have direct impact on time and its flow. Now, if time really was a non-entity, then this effect shouldn't be possible, as material reality cannot have direct influence on immaterial reality, for immaterial reality is the basis of matter, and altering it will alter matter itself. You may see the universe as a four-dimensional tubular shape, divided in two parts by the present, the potency and the act, future and past. Outside of this tubular shape is the realm of immateriality. We may call this realm hyper-Uranian, just for conventional purposes. The hyper-Uranian is where existence and everything we talked about until now resides. Quote unquote, of course, since existence is not in a place or in a time. Speaking of this, let's come to you.
Why do you believe my view is incorrect? It makes perfect sense.
I've explained everything I had to in the first episode. You are just a hard materialist that doesn't believe something can exist if it isn't in a place in a certain time. I guess numbers don't exist then, or laws of physics. I mean, have you ever seen the principles of dynamics in a place? No? Then I guess there is no difference between there being and not being any principle of dynamics.
That nonsense is completely irrelevant, because such things manifest in the physical world, and that is clear evidence of their existence.
Shut the fuck up. You don't even realize the fact that an object is distinct from its manifestation in the physical world. By that standard you should absolutely agree that existence exists. But you seem to either deny existence itself or just ignore the fact that it coincides with the very being you keep denying since a decade ago.
You're just trying to force your delusional fairy tale character into existence by giving it another name and redefining its characteristics. I can imagine a cat sitting right there whose characteristics include existing, but that doesn't mean it actually exists.
There is nothing with those characteristics. Such thing simply doesn't exist. Existence, however, does exist, and we can give it whatever name we want, especially if that name has been used repeatedly by most philosophers in history. Ever heard of synonyms? Or just symbols? Or words? What is a word? A word is a verbal sign made to indicate a concept or entity. Words are made by humans and therefore are entirely manipulable by us humans.
Well then, by that logic I could call cats unicorns and state unicorns exist.
That has never been the definition of a unicorn in the first place. It is not me who is trying to give a different meaning to a word used by everyone at every time. You people simply forgot about the original meaning of the word, and now assume it refers to something absurd in order to prove that doesn't exist. It's as if in the future the word cat was used to describe some kind of paradoxical shit, and therefore people would go around shouting that cats don't exist. And people living in the 21st century were just monkeys living in a dark age. Now go away, depart from me, learn how to debate properly, and then come back here with actual ideas. I think I've gained enough hate comments by now. I will wait for you next week for the last episode of Metaphysics. Everyone, be well. Hello everyone. This will be the last episode of Metaphysics, so it's going to be a relaxing one, relatively of course. We're going to solve the most famous paradox ever thanks to the philosophy we've built until now. Let's start. First, this is not a paradox. This is not a paradox either, and this is definitely not a paradox. A paradox is not something that looks counterintuitive. A paradox is something that defies logic. Now, the paradox we're going to solve today is the liar's paradox. It has been taught in many ways, such as the set version by Russell. Its most basic form, however, is this one. Is false, apparently. If is false, then it is true, but if it's true then it cannot be false. And if it is true then it is actually false. This paradox apparently seems incredibly difficult to solve and outright impossible. However, we can solve it. First, let's consider what true and false mean. You would certainly agree that true means in accordance with objective reality. Therefore, whatever is in accordance with reality is considered true. However, we discussed previously in this chapter that objective reality is no different from existence itself. Existence is objective, because it can't be denied. Therefore, we can confidently say that true, meant as in accordance with reality, means in accordance with existence. Now, it is clear that anything in accordance with existence exists, because something cannot be both in accordance with existence and not exist at the same time. That would be illogical. This means that something in accordance with reality is synonym to something that exists. There you have it. We determined that true means exactly the same as existing, as an adjective. By that logic, false means exactly the same as not existing. Knowing this, we can rephrase the paradox in a more suitable way. If being false means not existing, then this paradox can be written this way. Doesn't exist. Do you see it now? The same sentence that seemed impossible is now saying something perfectly logical. It is stating that anything that doesn't exist does not exist. There is nothing paradoxical in that. It is just the identity principle. If we come back to the original form, we can clearly see that it says false equals false. A equals A. We are talking about something that does not exist. The error we usually commit when reading this paradox is thinking that false means inverting the meaning of the word false. What about Russell's version? Well, that is still equally easy to solve. Does the set of all sets that do not contain themselves contain itself? The answer is, this makes no sense. Think about it. The set of all sets that do contain themselves can both contain and not contain itself, because if it contains itself then it is a set that contains itself. And if it doesn't contain itself then it is not a set that contains itself. Likewise, if the positive set is in a superposition of both containing and not containing itself, then its exact opposite must be in no position at all. It cannot neither contain nor not contain itself. Such set therefore simply does not exist. Well, this was a fun path. We've finally done it. We completely solved metaphysics. I can gladly say that finally we have scratched the surface. Now, it is time to move or focus towards some more material topic. Literally. Remember, you will never get rid of me. Let alone this early. Everyone, be well.